Good afternoon, everybody. It is a pleasure for us to be here, a real honor. We've been looking forward to this talk for quite some time. It's also great to see the sunshine. Being in the Midwest the last few months, the sun's kind of a rumor every day if it's going to come out or not, but really a pleasure, and we appreciate, Michael, this opportunity. I'm going to speak really brief. This is really a story about Alex and his parents, but I do want to set the foundation for how this book came to be, and I also will tell you my role originally. We've been actually lecturing all over the country for quite some time now. And after the book was finished, when we started getting requests to speak, I told Alex, I said, you know, this is your family story. I can just sit in the audience and enjoy it. And he said, no, I think it's important for you to be up here. You were part of this project, but I'm also not Jewish. I have many Jewish friends, longtime friends, but he said, I think it's important for you to be up here with me from your perspective as somebody who is not Jewish. So really briefly, I want to tell you about our partnership, how this book came to be, and again, as a person of non-Jewish faith, why my motivations here for my involvement in this project. So how do Alex and I know each other? I work at Butler University in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm on the fundraising side. I've been there for 13 years, and when I first came to Butler years back, when you're in fundraising, they give you a big list of people, a big list of names, and they say, go out and get money from them, check, cash, credit card, whatever that is. And I saw this name, Dr. Alex Core. And at that time, he was living in Baltimore, Maryland. And usually when I meet with a donor, I do a lot of checking on their background, their affiliation with the university, how much wealth they might have. That's what we're supposed to do, right? I was new to Indiana. I had just moved there, and I started reading about Eva Core, this amazing story of a Mengele twin who had miraculously survived the horrors of Dr. Joseph Mengele, had survived Auschwitz, and had gone on to forgive the Nazis. And immediately, this is one of the meetings. I've been doing this my whole life. I'm like, this is going to be a really interesting evening. And my preparation and my research was listening to his mother lecture on YouTube. So Alex and I met. He always picks a very expensive restaurant to eat, and on this occasion it was no different. And we immediately connected. We developed a rapport. We had a lot in common. We started talking about college basketball and athletics, and of course the Holocaust. And we spent about 3 hours that night. And I also learned that his father had his own amazing story. His father had survived multiple concentration camps. Alex will talk about it, but had a narrow escape. And I just became fascinated that night. And at the end of our talk, Alex said, you know, my mother, and she was 79 years old at the time, was speaking all over the world and had done so for decades, but said, my mother's never spoken at Butler University, his alma mater. And I said, how is that possible? So he didn't write me a check that night. He still hasn't. I'm waiting on that someday. But I went back to our president and I said, we've got to find a way to get Eva Core to speak at Butler. And I shared her information. And a couple weeks later, I got a great email that said, Eva Core is going to be our commencement speaker and our honorary degree recipient. Now, Indiana's known for basketball. Alex will talk about that in his presentation. And we play in a very iconic, famous gymnasium called Hinkle Fieldhouse. If you've seen the movie Hoosiers, that's where the final scenes are filmed. There were 9,200 people that day. And Eva Core, and I encourage you, if you get a chance, go to YouTube and put in Eva Core Butler University commencement address, gave the greatest speech that I've ever heard. She talked about her unbelievable story, her pathway to forgiveness. But the thing I remember that day was she looked our 1,000 graduates in the eyes and she said, when you get home tonight, I want you to hug your parents. Not just because they paid a lot of money for you to come here over the past 4 years, but because when I graduated from Auschwitz, when it was liberated, she was looking around for her parents to hug, and they weren't there. They had been killed upon being taken to Auschwitz. And I got goosebumps. I still get goosebumps when I tell that story. And then she motioned for Alex, who was sitting in the front row, to come up, and she said, now I'd like to give my own son a hug. And from that point on, our relationship really blossomed. We worked on a lot of different projects to honor his parents' legacies. We created a scholarship in his mother's honor at Butler. We collaborated with a good friend of ours on a documentary, Eva A-7063. Great document. I always mix up the numbers, so he's got to correct me here. And flash forward to about a year and a half ago, we go out often for dinner and talk about various subjects and his dating life as well. We're still trying to find a future Mrs. Core, so if you know anybody in Los Angeles, let us know. But he'd been saying this for years. He said, you know, I want to write a memoir. I want to write a book about my story as the son of 2 Holocaust survivors. And I had written several books before, and quite frankly, I was burned out. If you've ever written a book or tried, it's a very hard process. And I said, look, you're either going to quit talking about this or we're going to do it. And that same night, I fired off about 20 questions. We got the ball rolling, and the book came out last May. And I would say the project really accelerated after October 7th of 2023, when Hamas attacked Israel. We had an urgency to get this story out. Before I turn it over to Alex, I do want to just share again my motivations for this project. I had grown, like so many of you, infuriated with the rise of anti-Semitism in this country and globally, again, from my perspective. The Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, the Charlottesville white supremacy in 2017, that rally. Locally in Indianapolis, we had synagogues that were spray painted with swastikas. If Alex and I drive an hour and a half south from Indianapolis, we'd go to a place called Paoli, Indiana, which is where one of the largest deniers of the Holocaust in this country lives. So I was very frustrated and infuriated, and I think that fueled me. A second reason is I also wanted to help tell Alex's story. Many people know about his mother's story. You'll learn about his father's story today, but his story is remarkable in its own right. He's not only a great friend of mine, but he's a hero to me, and when he tells you about what he experienced growing up. You know, many survivors ended up in places like New York or Chicago or Los Angeles. The Cores ended up in a relatively small town in Indiana, and you can imagine what that experience is like. So I wanted to help tell his story. A couple final motivations. I have 2 relatively young children who are 13 and 16. And if you look at the surveys of how little young people know about the Holocaust, it's really frightening. And so for my own children, I wanted to hopefully create something that they will read, they'll pass along to their children, and so on. It's so important that we continue to tell these stories. And then finally, right in the process of writing the book, we have a very good friend who's also Jewish, and we went out to lunch, and he looked at me and he said, you know, why are you involved in these projects? You're not Jewish. And he didn't mean that in a derogatory term, but it was something I hadn't really thought about. It's something I think in this climate we all should be trying to tell these stories and fight against bigotry and racism and anti-Semitism. But as the more I thought about it, we all have a tie to the past, the good past and the bad past. And my wife's father was actually born in Nazi Germany. He's no longer with us, but he was born in 1932 in Munich, and he was a Hitler Youth. You pretty much had to be as a young boy growing up there. And ultimately, when the war ended, he and his parents moved to Chicago, Illinois, where he became a crusader against injustices and, you know, again, bigotry. He passed away in 2011, but in my own way, I wanted to dedicate this to him, but also, again, a reminder, Jewish, non-Jewish, whatever we are, we have some tie to the past, and it's important that we continue to tell these stories. We may mention at the end, but one of the biggest thrills for us is that this book is going to be adapted into a motion picture. And so Alex can talk more about that. Thank you. And we're Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, currently auditioning to play Alex. We're not sure who's going to do that yet. But hopefully that'll bring us back here. And without further ado, it's a real honor to introduce my good friend, Dr. Alex Core.
My parents had this incredible sense of humor. There's a couple of people here in the audience that know about that. And I can't tell my parents' story without including that. And so, you know, I think obviously we're very sensitive to the subject matter, but my parents did have this incredible sense of humor, and I don't know if that's what got them through a lot of the bad times, but I think it's important that you understand that's probably you're going to laugh here and there. So one of the things that people ask is why the title of this book. There's a couple different reasons. One of which is when I was 24, 25, I was in podiatry school. I'm a podiatrist. There's no business like toe business. I'll get that out of the way. So I was in podiatry school and I was diagnosed with cancer. And I tell people I have something in common with Lance Armstrong. No, I didn't win the Tour de France. I didn't date Sheryl Crow, and I definitely didn't do PEDs, but we had the same cancer, and testicular cancer. And so when I was diagnosed in Chicago, I was in podiatry school, and my mom kept on calling me, and I was delete on the old voicemail. And then one time she leaves a message. She goes, look, quit hanging up on me. You have to understand your dad's a survivor. I'm a survivor. You're going to be a survivor. This is your Auschwitz. And, you know, for me, when I heard this, that really hit home. And I understood where she was coming from. And I thought, you know, yes, I need to use my parents' strength to kind of overcome a different foe, mine being cancer, a lot different than what they went through. But for me, that really meant a lot to me. One of the other stories I tell, and the other reason for the title of the book is when I was in my 30s, just a couple years ago, I had moved to Denver, Colorado, and I didn't know a lot of people. And somebody said, oh, there's a second generation meeting. And so I thought, well, I'd go there to meet some people. And so all the second generation I had met up to that point were children of Mengele twins. All the Mengele twins, which you'll hear about, were ages 3 to 13. So all the children were my age. So I was like 33. I went to this meeting, and everybody's in their late 40s, early 50s. And each person told their story, and each person said, and this is when I thought about suicide, and this is when I thought about suicide. And I got up to talk at the podium, and I said, well, you know, I'm 6 years out of having cancer. Really, my parents' perseverance is the reason I'm here, and I think of this like a blessing, not a burden. And so with that, what I'd like to do is tell my parents' story. And as Graham said, most people knew my mom's story, but really didn't know my dad's story. Even in Indiana, where my dad, you'll hear about, lived for years, even recently I was at an event and somebody said, oh, you wrote a book about your mom. I said, well, actually it's about my parents. What do you mean your parents? Well, let's listen. So my dad's from Riga, Latvia, one of the Baltic states, and he was from a very, very traditional Jewish family. They were very religious. My dad had 3 older brothers. He was about 14 or 15 in 1941 when things got bad. His father happened to be a shoe cobbler. I didn't know this, but I guess shoes and feet run in the family. And the Nazis had invaded, and my grandfather wore very traditional Jewish garb. And he was on his way to work, and they told him, you're on the wrong side of the street. He kept on walking. They killed him immediately. My dad's oldest brother at the time, Zori, was on a boat, part of the Latvian Navy. He was in his early to mid-20s, and they found out he was Jewish, and they killed him and threw him overboard. So within a very short period of time, my father lost his oldest brother and his father. The family was taken from their home in Riga to a ghetto. My dad could see his home from the ghetto. We were there this past summer. And it was obviously very difficult, to say the least. This is just a quote. It's a little wordy. My dad's one of his first interviews about being in the ghetto. And so his mother, my grandmother, wanted to make sure the boys, my dad and 2 older brothers now, had some, relevance to being human. So she took the tablecloth from their home, put it in her skirt when they got to the ghetto. Obviously, minimal shelter, minimal food. So she put, when they had Shabbat dinner on the ground, she put the tablecloth just to give her boys some semblance of being human, even though food was scarce. At one point, my dad's second oldest brother was on a work detail, and he was told, you carry this log to the end of the field, and when you come back, I kill you. When my uncle Shlomo came back, he killed a Nazi and eventually escaped to the future Jewish homeland of Israel. So now my dad's with his 2 brothers, with one brother, Leo. So it's my dad, my mom, and Leo, my grandmother, my dad, and my uncle, Leo. And so now they're going to liquidate the ghetto, which some of you I know what that means. They're going to decide who's going to live and who's going to die. And so typically what they would do, they would put women, young children, and elderly on one side of the ghetto, and men and younger men that could work. So my dad's brother Leo goes to that side of the ghetto. My dad, because he looked younger, felt younger, was closer to his mother, went to the side of the ghetto with his mother, my grandmother. She knew what was going to happen, and she realized they were going to be killed. So she told my dad, no, you go with Leo. And my dad said, no, if they kill me, if they kill you, my life's not worth living without you. And they argued. And so at one point, obviously, my grandmother won the argument. So my dad went with Leo. And on November the 30th, 1941, at the Rumble of Forest, which is not far from the ghetto, there was a huge massacre, and my grandmother was killed. My dad went back a couple days later and saw a baby doll, because there were babies killed. And so when we were there this summer, I put a baby doll at the side of the memorial. So now my dad's with his brother Leo, and there are now multiple camps. They're in Kaiserwald, Stutthof, which, if you know statistics, the number of people that survived Stutthof was minimal. And then they ended up near Buchenwald, or in Buchenwald. And my dad, now it's 1945. So my dad's been in camps for 4 years. And you can't compare pain, but we'll talk about my mom's story shortly. So now it's April of 1945, and my dad is with brother Leo. They're on a death march. They were being told that they were taken to a safer area. They could sense that the Nazis' morale was down, the war, they were losing the war. And so my dad thought, well, they're probably going to kill us. So at some point, it was a dusk, and they were going around a ravine, and we still don't know the conversation between my father and brother Leo, but my dad makes a run for it. When my dad would tell the story years later, everything was sports analogies. So when he started lecturing, the Indianapolis Colts had a running back named Edgerrin James from Miami. So he would tell the story when he talked to kids. He ran from the bullets like Edgerrin James was dodging tacklers. So he runs and runs and runs. They don't send dogs after him. He hides in a building. He's got lice all over him. And the rumor was that the Americans were coming into the area to liberate. So for the next several hours, there's fierce fighting. My dad's now just hoping it doesn't get shot or killed. And then there's silence. And my father hears this weird language, people talking, and he thought, well, he was great with languages. He knew it wasn't Hebrew, it wasn't German, it wasn't Latvian. Maybe it's English. So he comes up with his hands up. 2 American GIs, they gave him a Coca-Cola. When I'm a little kid, years later, I didn't know what Pepsi was. We didn't have Pepsi. We had Coca-Cola breakfast, lunch, and dinner. To my dad's dying day, he had always Coca-Cola everywhere. We couldn't bring him Pepsi. And so one of the GIs says, how's it feel to be free? My dad knew the word free, and he said, good. The day this happened was April 15th, 1945. Years later, my birthday is April 15th. I didn't know this till Graham and I did the research. So now my dad is part of this battalion. The battalion was mainly involved in building bridges. The leader of the battalion was Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Neff. The 2 GIs thought Mr. Neff, being an officer, would think of my dad as a liability, so they hid him for several days. He became known as the mascot. And then about the 3rd day, Mr. Neff found out about my father and kind of interviewed my dad, because the thought was they're going to put him in a refugee camp. Well, my dad knew the terrain, knew several of the dialects, and they thought, well, he's not going to be a liability. He's going to help the battalion. So they gave him GI clothes. He was still in these tattered clothes with lice and dirt and torn clothes, and they put him on a Jeep with Mr. Neff, and for several weeks he was part of the battalion like he was an American soldier. So then they did get to an area where they were about conflict, and Mr. Neff said, Mickey, I've got no choice, but I've got to put you in a refugee camp. And my dad was picking up English really well and said, well, I want to go where you're from. Well, as you can see, my dad was from this place called Terre Haute, Indiana. And so my dad ends up in the refugee camp, and now the war in Europe is over. And so my dad's starting writing letters from the refugee camp. One of the letters ends up on Mrs. Neff's doorstep in Indiana. She telegrams her husband and says, that little boy, my dad's 19 by now, that little boy wants to come to Indiana. You need to help him. So Mr. Neff contacts the GIs and said, go find him in the refugee camp, and he can help you post-war. So now for the next year, my father is helping the GIs. He's reading a newspaper called Stars and Stripes, which some of you in the military would know, because that's how he learned how to speak English, and hanging out in bars and restaurants. This is him in Vienna. If you look closely, that's a Coca-Cola malt. He loved Coca-Cola. He started writing letters to Mr. Neff, and Mr. Neff was thinking ahead, so he contacted the school corporation in Terre Haute, because my dad's 4 years of high school were 4 years of concentration camp. And so Mr. Neff then secured placement for my dad in the school corporation. He reassured the school corporation my dad could read, write, and speak English. So on May 11th, 1946, my dad boards the boat, the SS Marine Flasher from Germany, New York, comes to Terre Haute. My dad, as a little boy in Riga, loved to play soccer. Nobody's playing soccer in Los Angeles in 1946, nor in Terre Haute, Indiana. And so my father just finds out that's Terre Haute, and my father finds out that he goes through high school in 1 year. It was supposed to be 3 years, tests through a bunch of classes, and now he enrolls at this place called Indiana State Teachers College, which is now Indiana State University, and he's very excited because everybody in Terre Haute's talking about basketball. My dad on a good day was 5'2", on a really good day. And so my father is really excited because he's going to take freshman classes, and one of the classes is a gym class, and he hears that the gym teacher is also the basketball coach. Some of you may know who that is. Coach John Wooden. So Coach Wooden was his first job as a coach. I don't have to tell this audience who Coach Wooden is, obviously, coached at UCLA. So my dad was very studious, and he was studying in gym class. Nobody studies in gym class. My dad was studying because he had to make A's to get into pharmacy school. So halfway through the semester, Coach Wooden takes my dad aside. Mickey, you're going to get an A, but you're such a good influence on these younger kids. I need you to take the class next semester. You'll get another A. So they became good friends. The next year, Coach Wooden goes to Westwood, Wizard of Westwood. My dad eventually gets into Purdue Pharmacy School. Years later, Coach Wooden was honored with some other guy you might have heard of named Larry Bird at Indiana State, and my dad sat at his table, and my mom took this picture. I think 2 or 3 years later, Coach Wooden passed away. So when I was a little kid, we would watch UCLA, and my dad said, that's my gym teacher. I said, what? And so Coach Wooden would start writing us letters. We get letters from Coach Wooden. Yeah, Mickey, I hope your family's doing good. I have this really good player. His name's Lou Alcindor. I think he's going to be pretty good. And so we got all these letters, and that's how I became a big sports fan and, of course, a big UCLA fan. So now we're going to kind of switch gears and talk to you a little bit about my mom and tell you her story. And so, as some of you may know, she's from Transylvania, Hungary-Romania border. In fact, I should say that Mary, the survivor here, when I got here today, she said, oh, I knew your mom. I said, what? She goes, oh, yeah, in 1984, I went to the Philadelphia survivors meeting, and your mom talked to me because we were the only 2 Hungarians there, and your mom said, how could you be a good Hungarian if you don't know Yiddish? And she just told me she'd learned the Yiddish since, because of my mom. My mom was also from a very religious Jewish family. There were 2 older girls, and her father, who I'm named after, Alexander, desperately wanted a boy. So now my grandmother is pregnant again. There's no ultrasound. So now the midwife comes to deliver, and hoping against hope, out comes a girl, Miriam. But they say, oh, there's another one coming. And now my grandfather, Alexander, had his hopes up again, and with great disappointment, Eva is born into the world. And so my mom was kind of the black sheep of the family. When the girls got in trouble, my mom was always the one that was blamed. One of the stories, when they were 4 or 5 years old, after dinner, the girls were put into a room to play with dolls. And this was probably 1939 or 1940. And my mom could hear her parents listen to the radio. So she, of course, put her ear to the door and hears somebody in German talking about Jews. It was Hitler. My mom could sense at the age of 4 or 5 that something bad was happening. And she told her dad, we need to leave. Now, if you know history, Hungary, Romania were supposedly going to be saved from the Nazis, from Hitler. Things changed a couple years later, but my grandfather, Alexander, did go with his brother to future Jewish homeland, 1940-41, hoping to see that maybe this would be a possible option in case things got bad in Europe. He came back very excited. But my grandmother said, well, how can we travel with these 2 5-year-old twins? It's impossible. So they stayed. Things were pretty normal. By 41, 42, things were still normal. My dad is already in a camp by now. And so in 42, 43, her teacher became a Nazi collaborator. One of the math equation she remembers, the teacher saying, if you have 6 Jews and you kill 3 Jews, how many Jews are left? And my mom and my aunt would go home, say, Mommy, why do we have to take this? And grandmother said, well, we just have to take it because we're Jewish. And so then in 43, 44, things got worse. Similar to my dad's story, my mom and all the pictures are identical twins. My mom's always on the left. Mom, grandmother, aunt, grandfather, sister. Oh, I have a pointer. That's right. And that's a family friend. This is a cousin. Again, mom. Oh, there we go. Mom, aunt. So they're taken to a ghetto, similar to my dad's story. This family friend would throw food across the barbed wire. Her father was a reverend or a minister in town. They were the only Jewish family in Ports, Romania. And then they're put on a cattle car. People say it's a train. It was a cattle car. Little peephole. Nobody's telling them where they're going. After 3.5 days, the cattle car starts slowing down. And all of a sudden, they realize that they were in Germany. The last stop when they would exchange water for gold watches was in German instead of Hungarian. And so before the cattle car opens, my grandfather has a family in the corner, says, if anybody survives this place, you go to Israel. So the cattle car opens to mass chaos. This is obviously the selection platform at Auschwitz. My mom and my aunt hold on to their mother's arms. Within seconds, my mom no longer sees her father, disappears in the crowd, gets swallowed up into the crowd. Dogs barking, people are screaming, chaos. The 2 sisters disappear in the crowd. And now my mom's looking up like she's landed on Mars, terrified. And then all of a sudden, somebody's running up and down the selection platform yelling in German, twins, twins. Again, my mom and my aunt looked alike, dressed alike. They asked my grandmother, are they twins? Before she could say yes, 3 Nazis jump out and separate them. The last thing my mom remembers is her mother's arms stretched out, crying and screaming. If my mom was here today, she would tell you the one regret she has, that she didn't know this was the last time she would see her mother, and she never could say goodbye because she thought she would see her again. So the twins are taken away. They're taken to a barracks where they're tattooed. My aunt's number is A7064. As Graham said, my mom's number is A7063. When I was a young kid, my mom's number, I thought it was because she was old. She was probably 35. It was always very smudged. When I'd go to Israel and see my aunt, it was clear, like it was written with a fine-tip pen. They didn't talk about these experiences, which we'll come back to in a second, till 1983-84. But one time my mom asked my aunt, how come, Miriam, your number's so clear and my number's so unclear? And Miriam said, well, you must have blocked it out, because when you were being tattooed, it took 5 Nazis to hold you down. You were kicking and biting and screaming. And my mom would say jokes sometimes. She'd say, well, Miriam, you know, we were raised to be good Jewish girls, and good Jewish girls don't bite. I don't remember this. I must have blocked it out. So that first night, they're taken from the barracks where they're tattooed to the barracks of the twins, the Mengele twins, the female side of the camp. And my mom and my aunt were raised to be kosher. And so they were given some bread. And they said, is it kosher? And one of the older girls said, well, you better eat it, because if you don't eat it, the rats are going to eat it. And my mom and my aunt said, well, we're not eating it until we see our parents. And one of the older twins said, see the smoke there in the distance? That's where your parents are. And my mom said, what do you mean? That's crazy. Nobody would be burning bodies. Who would be burning bodies? So one of the older twins said, well, you'll find out tomorrow, because you're going to meet Dr. Mengele. He's the one that's doing all these experiments. So sure enough, the next morning, Mengele shows up, all the twins, ages 3 to 13, stand at attention like little toy soldiers. And sure enough, Mengele was kind of inspecting his new subject, which my mom and my aunt were part of those experiments. A lot of people ask, what was the purpose of the experiments? There's a lot of controversy about that. One of the things we do know, that it was done without informed consent. And so when I speak to medical groups, you know, one of the things, particularly when I talk to researchers and doctors, is that, you know, we as doctors, me as a podiatrist, I need to tell the patient what's being done to them. And unfortunately, my mom and the other Mengele twins didn't have that privilege. If you look closely, even Miriam, Moses, my mom's name and aunt's name. And so This was a part of a daily routine from May of 44. They were injected, blood taken, blood drawn, and this went on through November, December of 44. My mom said it was extremely demeaning. They would lie naked on tables for hours, body parts inspected, injected, and then at one point, the fall of August or so of 44, there were no Nazi guards in the guard tower one day, and so my mom looks up and sees a plane circling Auschwitz with a smoke signal in the back. And when I heard this story, I think I was in my 30s, and she said, well, I saw the plane, I looked close, there was an American flag on it. I said, Mom, I don't get it. How would you know there's an American flag on a plane? There's no internet, there's no TV, how would you know? She goes, well, Alex, remember, I had an aunt from Cleveland, Ohio, and when I was a little girl in Romania, we would get letters from Cleveland, Ohio, and I always opened the letters because I was the troublemaker, and on the letter was this postage stamp. That was the American flag. And so I tell you this part of the story because my mom would tell you that from the second she landed on the selection platform, she no longer can think like a 10-year-old. She had to think like an adult every day because it was an opportunity to live, opportunity to die. You had to be lucky, but you had to be smart. So she looked at the plane. It was a reconnaissance mission. Years later, when she spoke and lectured, she met one of the pilots from the plane. And so around the same time, one time Mengele injected my mom with something. She got sick. Very sick, and Mengele looked at her and says, too bad, she's only got 2 weeks to live. So she was separated from my aunt. My aunt was put in isolation. My mom was in the barracks, if you recall, usually it's during Yom HaShoah or International Holocaust Remembrance Day where you see people crawling. My mom was in that barracks, and she called it the Barracks of the Living Dead. And she realized there was a faucet at the end of the barracks, and she made sure she'd get water. And Mengele, again, everything was done by fever charts, and he said, oh, she's got 2 weeks to live. So my mom would make up her mind, said, no, I'm going to survive. She always told me she had a guardian angel. And so she did. Finally, her fever broke. She was reunited with my aunt. By this time, my aunt had been injected with something, which we'll talk about. And so this was now the fall. The experiments continued, and by November, December, and I didn't give you this, what was the reason for the experiments? A lot of people theorize, I'm just going to rearrange some furniture so people can see. If you ask any of the Mengele twins, they would tell you that the reason they were used was to create fertility drugs so German mothers could have multiple births. David Marwell, who came out with a book 4 or 5 years ago, would disagree. His thought was that you had to test some mothers, which, again, I'm just a podiatrist, but that makes probably a little bit more sense. Now we're in the November, December. For sometimes several weeks, the experiments are stopped. One time, there were no Nazis around, so my mom and a couple of the other twins, not related, went to the kitchen to organize food. Organized food meant steal food. So they went to the kitchen to get potatoes. They put potatoes in their skirt, and next thing you know, they hear a Jeep. They turn around, 2 Nazis spraying bullets. The last thing my mom remembers is a rifle pointed at her head. She wakes up, she thinks she's in heaven. She touches the 2 bodies near her, ice cold. So she realized very quickly that she had fainted, again thinking that she had this guardian angel. She fainted, the 2 bodies were dead. She had to go back to the barracks to tell those 2 girls that their twins had died. Shortly thereafterwards, all the female twins are taken from Auschwitz to Birkenau by the same 2 Nazis to Auschwitz I. Once they get to Auschwitz I, the Nazis disappear, and all the girls run into the barracks. Now we're into January 45. One day it's snowing, and the twins could hear fighting in the distance, similar to my dad's story. And so one of the older twins could see out the window, and they said, oh, we see something moving. It was the Ukrainian army, the Red Army, January 27, 1945, to liberate Auschwitz. This is my mom and my aunt. Mom, aunt, I'll get out of your way so everybody can see. So this is always known as a liberation video or picture. It was not January 27, 1945. When the Ukrainians came on January 27, they gave them food and candy and milk. And they said, we're coming back because we wanted to create propaganda. And so my mom would tell you, if anybody was on a trip with her, that, oh, it was a couple days after this. If you talk to the Auschwitz tour guides, it was later February or even early March. they came back with video cameras. My mom, some people knew her pretty well in this room. She liked attention. So I've seen the video of this. When this video starts, she's in the middle, so I theorize that she ran to the front with my aunt. So she's in the front. And so this is the famous liberation picture. The ladies in white are a Red Cross. These are the Changara twins, which I'll talk about shortly. And so where will they go? Their hope was, surely they're 10 years old. Their parents had to survive, right? So they went back eventually. They were in an orphanage in Katowice. Mrs. Changara, the mother of those two twins, who was a friend of my grandmother's, came to the orphanage and lied and said she was an aunt, signed them out. Eventually they end up back in Romania, hoping against hope as they're running down the hill to their home that they would see their parents. The only thing they saw in the house were those two pictures I showed you and the family dog. My mom would tell you that the Nazis killed people, but didn't kill dogs. So they then are taken in Cluj, Romania by an aunt. They desperately were looking for affection when they were in the orphanage. They had clean sheets, food. The nuns didn't give them hugs or kisses. Their aunt in Cluj didn't give them hugs or kisses. And they desperately missed their parents. So finally, in 1950, they end up going to Israel. And so my mom would tell me the story that she was having nightmares for several years after the war. Once she got to Israel, the grocery store clerk was Jewish, her teacher was Jewish, people in the kibbutz were everybody's Jewish, and all her nightmares disappeared. They liked to date. When they were in the kibbutz, I said, how was it living in a kibbutz? They were all Holocaust survivors, teenagers, boys and girls. And she said, my mom said, well, Alex, I liked it a lot. I learned how to say I love you in 10 languages. And they were in the Israeli army. My aunt was a nurse. My mom was a draft woman architect. Another funny story. They were dating in their early 20s, and they would never tell a guy or a boy that they had a twin. So one time my mom didn't really like the guy at all. So she invited him over to listen to music. My aunt's hiding my mom was hiding in the closet, and my aunt answers the door. He doesn't know it's my aunt. He thinks it's my mom. They sit down to listen to music. He reaches over to kiss my aunt, not knowing it's my mom, or vice versa, thinking it's my mom. My mom jumps out of the closet. He ran away, never to be seen again. And so then my aunt got married at the age of 27 to a Sabra, a native Israeli. My mom felt like an old hag. At the age of 27, she had just got out of a bad relationship. My dad came to visit brother Shlomo, who had killed a Nazi. My mom wouldn't like me to tell this part of the story. My uncle Shlomo, he worked for Mahariv, the Israeli newspaper. He put an ad in the paper. There was no internet dating at the time. That was a joke. Anyway, and so my mom responded to the ad. My mom knew no English. My dad knew very little Hebrew. So on the third date, over a 2-week period, my dad asked my mom a question. She said yes. He pulls out a ring. They're engaged. And so my mom was in the Israeli army, and my dad had to go back to work as a pharmacist in Terre Haute. And so now it's a couple months later. My mom's flying to New York. And my uncle Leo, who had survived, who didn't speak any Hebrew, with his wife, meets my mom at the airport with an Israeli cousin of my mom's. Ruth, my aunt Ruth, wife of Leo, puts a corsage on my mom's lapel. And my mom said in Hebrew to her cousin, what is this stupid flower? Women in Israel don't wear corsages, at least they didn't back then. My mom says, what is this stupid corsage? What is this? And she goes, I'm going to take it off. And the cousin says, no. When you get to the restaurant, say you're hot. So he gets to the restaurant. My mom says, hot, takes off the jacket. Everybody orders steak. My mom wanted to sound very debonair, so everybody, they ordered steak well. When it came to her, she said, well, and it came out like a brick. They get back to West Hartford, where Leo lived. They call my dad in Terre Haute, again with dictionaries. My dad says, all my friends, their wives, are going to throw you shower. My mom looks up in the dictionary, thinks maybe a mikveh. And then she says, Mickey, tell your friends thank you very much, but I take shower alone. That was my mom's first day in the United States. So a couple years later, I'm born, and I have a sister 2 years younger. I always thought I was born in Terre Haute. My first language was not English, it was Hebrew. By the time I was 5, my dad said, you better teach the kid English because he's got to go to kindergarten next year. And so it was normal. We would go to Israel every couple of years. I fit in well there. In Terre Haute, I kind of fit well in the Gentile world. And things were kind of normal. We played sports and did, family vacations. But then one of the things that happened, which Graham alluded to, when I was in 5th grade during Halloween, this is 1971 or so, 72, kids during Halloween would throw corn at the house and then run to the next house. This is during October. My mom heard the corn rattling the house, images of 1940s. Next thing you know, she hides behind a tree the next day and chases these kids, all my contemporaries, around the yard. It was kind of funny for a while. And then one day I remember coming home from a PTA meeting, "Go home, dirty Jew," and on the front window. I didn't know what a dirty Jew was. I had no idea. My dad would kind of say, well, just leave him alone. My mom says, how can I leave him alone? Her father didn't leave him alone. Look what happened. So this went on for 2 Octobers in a row. My mom tried to call the parents and said, Mike's, why does he do this? Oh, they're just having fun. You let them have fun. And the parents didn't understand. Nobody talked about the Holocaust in 1972 or 73. And so finally, every October, flights to Israel were cheap. And so she would just go to Israel the whole month of October to see Dona Miriam, my Aunt Miriam. And, they would do the thing with the corn. My dad would just turn the light off and go to sleep and watch his sports, and it became no big deal. A couple other things, and then we'll get to the question and answer. And so things were pretty normal for me in high school. We talked about the Holocaust. It didn't dominate every dinner conversation. One of the things that kind of changed things in 1978, the miniseries Holocaust, I'm sure you remember, on NBC, was on. And a couple weeks before, my mom heard that the segment was going to be, the miniseries was going to be on. So she called the local NBC affiliate in Terre Haute and said, is this a movie? Or is this a documentary? Or what is this? And they said, well, why are you asking? Oh, I'm a survivor of Auschwitz. I'm a Mengele twin. You're a what? She hadn't spoken at all. And they said, well, why would you want to come to the set the last night of the show and then speak on the news segment? She goes, sure. So it was me, my sister, my dad. And one of the stories I always tell is the very last scene, one of the last scenes, if you know the movie, there's a little boy after liberation kicking a soccer ball. I look over, my dad is crying hysterically. I'm high school, I never see my dad cry. But I realize he saw the little boy in the screen as himself. And so with my mom's emotions in check, she gave a great interview, and that kind of started her speaking career. But for me, it also was a message that I needed to help my dad kind of deal with his past and at the same time encourage my mom to speak. And, things for my dad, very patriotic, very much big Purdue fan. We lost today, of course, to Indiana. But my mom was more of an activist, helped with the Head Start program and a Black Community Center in Terre Haute. And then in 1984, she happened to meet another twin. Actually, ironically, after Mary met my mom in Philly, my mom also met another twin, and that started the whole ball rolling, kind of full circle here. And so my mom would, when she got a letter in the mail, she was always very impressed if somebody was the president of an organization. So she, of course, named herself president. Aunt Miriam was vice president, and they had a whole group of survivors, and they were able, as it says, to find 122 twins in 10 countries and 4 continents. And then my mom said, well, we're going to go back to Auschwitz. And so in 1985, it was my first trip there. I didn't have textbooks about the Holocaust. My parents were my textbooks, more my mom than my dad. And I can remember the first time I went back, we had about 10 survivors, and I was caught in charge of logistics. And I knew where everything was. It was really odd. I knew where my mom's barracks was. I knew where the selection platform was. I had never been there. And now I was just there a month ago. It's my 30th or 31st trip. I'll be going again in June. It's not something I look forward to going, but my mom would go all the time, and sometimes she would be sick, and some people in the room had been with her, and she'd get to Auschwitz and have this incredible energy. Like, I thought you were sick. I'd go, wait, you go, I'm fine now, I'm fine. And so couple other bad things happened that kind of led her down this path, which Graham alluded to. So in 1986 for Yom HaShoah, she held up a sign in the Capitol Rotunda, Washington, D.C. She was helping support legislation that would help other Mengele twins. She was obviously dressed like a survivor on purpose with the dress to call attention to herself. So the officer to the right, David Wells, first day in the job, approached my mom and said, "Ma'am, you need a permit." And my mom rolled up her sleeve and said, "There's my permit." His commanding officer in the suit pulls on my mom. Next thing you know, and if you've seen the video, it's horrific. She's dragged away. Elie Wiesel was on stage, and my mom thought that the officer kind of was post-traumatic stress. She thought it was a Nazi, and she was hysterical. Finally, and I didn't know this until 3 months ago, David's now become a friend, and the commanding officer, was ready to arrest my mom, put her in jail, and David said, no, you can't arrest her. Look at her left arm. She's a survivor. Give her a warning. So my mom flew back to Indiana, was terrified, paranoid, and thought the whole world was against her. And at this point, when I'm in my 20s or so, I said, "Mom, maybe just go back and do real estate." And she did that for a while, and then the awful happened. My mom's twin died. So in 1987, when I had cancer, a couple months after I had a clean bill of health, my aunt was going to kidney failure. So my mom flew to Israel, donated her kidney to my aunt. When they took the kidney out of my aunt's body, it had not developed beyond the age of 10 when the experiments were done. For a couple years, the transplant was a success. And then in 1991, my aunt developed urinary tract polyps. That year, she came to Indianapolis. The same doctor that treated me and treated Lance Armstrong treated my aunt for free chemo. For 4 months, her lung fields were filled. 4 months later, completely clear. She went back to Israel and then died a year and a half later. And so my relatives there were very religious. They buried her that same day. My mom would cry and said, "I never buried a family member." And she was really at rock bottom. And then a couple months later, she gets a strange phone call and says, "Eva, this is Dr. Michalczyk. I'm a doctor in Boston, Massachusetts, and I hear you like to lecture to doctors." My mom said, "Sure, I like lecturing to doctors." "Well, we're doing a medical ethics conference, and we'd like you to come to Boston." "Okay, great." And then he said something strange. He said, "Well, Eva, maybe you could bring with you one of those Nazi doctors." My mom said, "Dr. Michalczyk, where do you think I can find one of those dudes? The last time I looked, they were not advertising in the yellow pages." That's exactly what she said. And so my mom remembered that the last project that my mom and my aunt worked on included a Nazi doctor. It was for a German ZDF PBS station. And that Nazi doctor was Hans Munch. He was cleared of all charges at Auschwitz. He refused to do selections. He helped save 20-some Jewish doctors. So my mom contacted his family in Germany, and "Will you come and meet Eva in Boston?" And the response was, "No, he's not coming to Boston. He'll give you an interview, but you got to come to Germany." My mom was terrified to go to Germany. So a Dutch TV crew accompanied my mother, went to Germany. First question my mom asked him, "Dr. Munch, trying to help the other Mengele twins, what do you know about the experiments?" And he said, "Eva, I don't know anything. He kept everything to himself, but I have nightmares." My mom said, "What? You have nightmares too? I thought we were the ones with the nightmares. Why do you have nightmares?" And Dr. Munch said, "Well, besides helping save those Jewish doctors, I periodically had to stand guard duty outside the gas chamber." And he went on to describe in great detail the operation of the gas chamber. And my mom said, "Dr. Munch, what you just told me, the whole world needs to know. We're going to Auschwitz for the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz in January of 1995. Would you come with us to Auschwitz to tell the world what you just told me?" With no hesitation, he said yes. So my mom came back to Terre Haute, Indiana, and told me what happened. And she says, "Look, he's coming with us for the 50th anniversary, but I need to give him a thank you gift. How do you thank a Nazi doctor?" She went to the local Hallmark store in Terre Haute, Indiana, looking for a thank you card for 2.5 hours. No card. Went to the liquor store, nothing seemed appropriate. Then months and months and months in advance, she's thinking every day, how can I thank a Nazi doctor? And then one day she says, what I'm going to do in my name only, and I want to stress that, in my name only, I'm going to thank him by forgiving him for being a Nazi. When I heard this, I said, I don't think this is a good idea, Mom. I don't care what you think. He's documenting history. So she writes up a document of forgiveness, takes it to her local English professor, and says, Dr. Kaufman, I need you to look at this document because I want to make sure there are no mistakes. And so Dr. Kaufman looks at the document and says, Eva, you don't have any spelling mistakes, but I think you're forgiving the wrong guy. My mom said, no. I want to give him a gift, and that gift is that I'm thanking him, and I want to do it in my name only. So sure enough, January 27th, 1995, Dr. Munch does indeed tell the world what he told my mom. And then my mom does indeed give him that gift, the gift of forgiveness, which she's obviously, we can talk about it. And my mom, I can remember distinctly, a reporter from Europe says, okay, Eva, you've forgiven Dr. Munch. How about Dr. Mengele? No, I'm just forgiving Dr. Munch. She realized very quickly that she obviously had given Dr. Munch a gift, but she didn't realize until months later that she had given herself a gift. She no longer had this chip on her shoulder. She no longer was angry at the world. She could smile and laugh more. And so a lot of people misconstrue her forgiveness. There was no deal made between Dr. Munch and my mom. He didn't know anything about the forgiveness. And I'll tell you a couple other things here, and then we'll go to the Q&A. So in 1995 in Terre Haute, as Michael said, we do have, I think, or Graham said, we have a Candles Holocaust Museum. And one of the things that we can talk about is in 2003, a white supremacist burned it down. If you recall, Timothy McVeigh was executed in Terre Haute, Indiana, down the street. So on the outside of the window before they blew it up, it said, "Free Timothy McVeigh." So there have been a lot of bad things that have happened. My dad eventually did start lecturing there. And we made multiple trips. This was on a trip during one of the January trips. This was an old slide. I think I'm up to 30. My mom still has a Twitter account. She liked to promote the fact that she was looking for a wife for her son. So this is it was on Twitter and Facebook. And so in any event, she never drank. That was a funny picture. And as we know, my mom had a great sense of humor. I'm going to finish with this, and then we'll go to the Q&A. So my mom was the Grand Marshal Indy 500, the big auto race in Indianapolis in 2017, I believe. And so we were on the red carpet, and Jake Gyllenhaal, the movie star, was behind us, and all the cameras were on him. And when my mom lectured to kids, she would tell kids, I too am prejudiced. And they said, how can you be prejudiced? Years earlier, when she was lecturing one time, she didn't like kids, particularly boys with long hair, tattoos, torn jeans, and earrings. And so one day she was lecturing on her way to the auditorium. These three boys in front of her, their pants were cleaning the floor, and one of them drops a pencil, and my mom said he had the audacity to pick it up. I saw things I've never seen before. So she tells the teacher, because they also had long hair, tattoos, and torn jeans, oh, those three kids, they must be your drug addicts. Oh, no, Eva, one kid's going to Harvard, Yale, they're all our valedictorians. Really? So when my mom would lecture to kids, she would say, I too need to judge people not on their appearance, but on their character and their actions. So here we are on the red carpet. This guy jumps out and says, hey, baby, let's take a picture. He had sunglasses on, torn jeans, long hair, and my mom looks at me, and I take a step back. Now all the cameras are on him, and a bunch of pictures, and he looks at me and goes, hey, man, take good care of her. So we go up to watch the race, and about an hour and a half later, of course, you see it on the slide. I didn't know who it was. They said, only at the Indy 500 would you have Motley Crue's Nikki Sixx and Grand Marshal Holocaust survivor Eva Kort. So my mom would talk to Nikki all the time. In fact, later that day, she tweeted him for everybody, Dear Nikki, how can I become a rock star like you? He tweets back, Eva, my dear, you've been a rock star your whole life. And so months later, and I'll leave with this, my mom was having some shoulder problems. And I said, Mom, how's your shoulder doing? She goes, oh, Alex, it's so much better. Nikki's been giving me this stuff called CBD oil. It works great. I'll leave it there, and I'll be glad to answer any questions. I have a couple more things at the very end, but I think now is a good time to open it up for questions. Yes?
What year did she pass?
July 4th, 2019, in Krakow during one of our trips to Auschwitz.
The only people that can forgive are the victims and the Almighty. And that is the way I've always seen it.
I'm not going to disagree with you. I understand where you're coming from. I think it's a very personal choice. And my mom was not out a crusader trying to convince people to forgive. However, if they didn't come to her, she would tell them how she did it. And a lot of times people would come to Candle's Holocaust Museum. They want to know a little bit about history, but somebody in their family had wronged them, had done something wrong, and they needed to find out how to forgive a family member or a coworker or somebody. And they would come, and I can remember my mom having lectures with people individually, how did she forgive, and she would tell them how she forgave. And so my dad calls me one day, and he says, I've seen this change in your mom. I'm going to forgive so-and-so. I go, well, Dad, we don't know that his family was involved. He goes, no, it's a symbolic gesture. So he calls a press conference at Terre Haute. I was living on the East Coast, and he has this big press conference, and to his dying day, he had that player's jersey in his room. After my mom died on July 4th, 2019, January of 2020, there was a Stutthof guard, Bruno Day, DUI on trial. So the family friend, I should say, in Germany says, hey, they're looking for people at Stutthof. Would your dad want to testify? So from his nursing home, he was still of sound mind. We told him what was happening. He goes, well, let me think about it. And I thought for sure, absolutely for sure, he was going to say he should be sent to prison, sent to jail, killed. And he surprised me and a family friend. He said, in your mom's memory, I think he should be forgiven. So, and that was, he died. My dad died 2.5 years later, but and it was 7 months after my mom passed away. So it's very individual.
Precisely.
No, absolutely. And I'm not here to say that right or wrong. I can tell you for me, as I tell people, I just did a TED Talk on Friday night about this whole subject. I firmly believe that it gave my mom another 24 years of life and made her healthier and happier. And it's not for everyone. And I really think everybody has a different journey to healing, and that was her journey.
Several people have said the chapter they got most out of the book was his battle on cancer, his battle with cancer, and how his parents pushed him through that. And so for me, the chapter about I learned a lot in the process. I mean, I've known him for 12 years, and I learned again about all the anti-Semitism that he fought. I mean, he had a patient that once said, hey, are you going to Jew me out of my money? And his response, and this is a credit to him, is, no, I'm going to give you your next 3 visits for free. And so I learned a lot about him through that process. The book is going to be adapted into a motion picture, which is a big deal for us. If you know anybody who wants interest in this, please let us know. But again, a great honor being with you today. Great questions, and it really is an amazing story. Again, thank you again for having us.
Thank you very much.